All right, this tier of quarterbacks are quarterbacks that are probably going to be QB 25 or worse. If you're starting one of these two quarterbacks, the look on Russell Wilson or Derek Carr's face is probably the look on your face and what you're feeling right now. I expect Derek Carr to be the worst quarterback this week. He presents you with basically no rushing upside. If there was a way for me to rank him lower than this, I would. He just really doesn't possess very much upside in this offense. He's probably going to be vultured by Taysom Hill in the red zone as well as Kamara. It's just, he's just, yeah, don't start him if you don't have to. Then Russell Wilson has been getting sacked over and over again. The offensive line looks terrible. Arthur Smith, it looks as if he's going to have ruined the Falcons, and then now he's going to ruin the Steelers as well. The running game doesn't look good in the preseason. Their passing game looks atrocious. Their O-line can't protect anybody. Russell Wilson doesn't have the mobility that he once had. Yeah, if you're starting either one of these guys, the look on Russ or Derek's face is probably the look on yours as well. This tier of quarterbacks are quarterbacks that theoretically could be within the top 25. You have Jacoby Brissett at 30, Bo Nix at 29, Gardner at 28, Sam Darnold at 27, and Daniel Jones at 26. With Jacoby Brissett, he really doesn't have that much rushing upside. He's getting a lot older. The offensive line in New England is terrible. They have some of the worst position skill players in the league. It's really just not ideal for you to have to play him. Obviously, it's good rostering him in general because you want to have a starting quarterback. Hopefully, you have better options than him, though. At 29, we have Bo Nix against Seattle. It's really not a good matchup for him. I do expect them to be losing this game, so he's probably going to have to pass a little bit more than they'd like him to. He also just does not have the best playmakers on his team. I do think he has solid rushing upside. I just don't think this offense is going to be scoring very many points. At 28, we have Gardner Minshew against the Chargers. If you're starting him this week, you probably have a look like he does in this picture. You're feeling pretty risky. So as far as Gardner Minshew is concerned, he's playing against Jim Harbaugh, a defensive-minded head coach. Fortunately for him, he does have Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers, as well as Michael Mayer there. They have a solid running back in Zamir White, so it's not going to be the worst offense overall for him. I just think this is going to be a very challenging week. Then we have Sam Darnold against the Giants. I expect them to be beating the Giants. It's just with Sam Darnold, we haven't really seen that much upside. We've seen a lot of downside, though. So while Sam Darnold does potentially have some upside because the offense is so great and KOC is a great offensive-minded head coach, until we see consistent play from Sam Darnold, I'll just have him ranked a little bit lower over more proven players. Then at QB 26, we have Daniel Jones. The picture in front of you is Daniel Jones. That's how he looks when he tries to throw the football. Now, the thing is, he'll probably be losing this game. He does carry a decent amount of rushing upside. If he can stop throwing so many pick sixes and just throw the ball to Malik Neighbors and stop just throwing pick sixes, he does have potential rushing upside to get you a decent fantasy week. There's just a lot better, more stable, high floor assets that can offer you a decent ceiling that go ahead of him. This tier of quarterbacks could find themselves within the top 20 if they have a good week. All three of these quarterbacks either have a better offensive-minded head coach or offensive coordinator. First, we have Bryce Young against New Orleans. It's not the most inviting matchup, but he has Deontay Johnson now. They still have Adam Thielen. They drafted Xavier Legette. So we'll have to see, but with Dave Canales there now, I do think that Bryce Young is going to have more upside than we've seen in the past. He just doesn't present you with that much rushing upside. He can scramble for a first down, but the ceiling is definitely limited. At 24, we have Will Levis against Chicago. It's not as inviting of a matchup as you might think. He has to contend with Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson in the Bears secondary. That's not that inviting. And we didn't see the rushing upside that we saw at the University of Kentucky from him this past season, which was a little bit surprising to me. However, he now finds himself with the former offensive coordinator for the Bengals as his head coach. He also experienced a wide receiver upgrade in Calvin Ridley to go with DeAndre Hopkins, who was there already. He also has Tyler Boyd to man the slot. Chigo's a potential breakout candidate at tight end. And they have a revamped running game now that they have Tony Pollard there. So I think he is going to look a little bit better this season. It's just without the rushing upside, he's probably not going to be a top 10 quarterback too often. At 23, we have Geno Smith against Denver. It is a decent matchup for him. I expect with Ryan Grubb being there now, the offense is going to be a lot more efficient. I think they're going to run a lot more 11 personnel. Now, this past season, they would have run more 11 personnel, but their offensive tackles were hurt basically the entire season. So they were doing a lot more 12 personnel to try to keep Geno Smith from going to the IR every week. I do expect this offense to be a lot more efficient, assuming health to the O-line. It's going to be a very, very solid week to own Geno Smith. It's just like these other quarterbacks, he really just doesn't have any rushing upside. This tier of quarterbacks could finish top 15 if they have a good week. At 22, we have Baker Mayfield. 21, we have Deshaun Watson. At 20, we have Kirk Cousins. 19, Aaron Rodgers. 18, Justin Herbert. And 17, Matthew Stafford. Baker Mayfield finds himself in an offense that's no longer going to have Dave Canales as his head coach, so I expect the offensive efficiency to decrease a relatively large amount. However, he still has Chris Godwin, who they say they're going to put back in the slot, which is better for him and better for Baker. They still have Mike Evans. They drafted Jalen McMillan. They still have Trey Palmer, so they should have a solid receiving core. And Cade Otton looks like a fine tight end. He did start to break out in the playoffs this past season. Their running game, however, is just not going to be that great. I think that Bucky Irving is more talented than Rachaad White in terms of running the ball. However, Rachaad White is bigger, so they're probably going to give him a majority of the carries, which slows down the offense and is just not very good for it. I think that he has a decent amount of upside to potentially be a top 15 quarterback if he throws for, say, 3 touchdowns this week. I think it'll be relatively close between them and Washington, but there's just quarterbacks with much more upside that are also safer. Then at 21, we have Deshaun Watson against Dallas. We've seen in the past that he does have the theoretical upside to be a top 5 quarterback any given year. He just hasn't shown it for 3 years now, so I have to rank him down here. I do project them to be losing to Dallas, so he should get a solid amount of passing work. He has Amari Cooper there. He has David Njoku. Not the best supporting cast, but he does have a decent amount of rushing upside. So if he can continue to stay healthy for once, he does possess more upside than this. It's just, once again, there are better quarterbacks ahead of him, so he's ranked down here. At 20, we have Kirk Cousins against Pittsburgh. It's really not an inviting matchup in any way, shape, or form. He is, however, still in a great offense. They have an even better O-line in Atlanta than they did in Minnesota. They have Drake London at receiver, Kyle Pitts at tight end, Bijan in the backfield. It's a very solid matchup for him. We'll just have to see, coming off an Achilles injury, how he performs. He just doesn't provide any rushing upside, so he's a very safe floor but limited ceiling quarterback, I think. Then at 19, we have Aaron Rodgers against San Francisco. Definitely not an inviting matchup in any way, shape, or form. I do expect it to be relatively high scoring, though, because they made a lot of improvements to their offensive line, signing Tyron Smith, trading for Morgan Moses, drafting Olu Fashanu. Those 3 tackles are better than any tackle they've had in many, many years. He has Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, potentially Mike Williams. We'll see about that. Malachi Corley in the slot, unless Xavier Gibson beats him out. So I do expect Rodgers to return to form because he has a lot to prove to all the doubters. So I think he's going to be a lot better than people are giving him credit for this season. It's just without the rushing upside, he's a very good quarterback. We'll just have to see where he is right now. But as far as motivation is concerned, he'll have plenty of that. And then at QB 18, we have Justin Herbert against Las Vegas. So I just really don't like the scheme. As a Ravens fan, trust me, Greg Roman is not it. You will have a solid running game, but that guy is the least creative passing-wise as an offensive coordinator I've just about ever seen. So I expect J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Kamani Vidal to have very good seasons depending on who's healthy and who's not. I think that Justin Herbert's ceiling is limited in this offense. He's very talented, though. He's probably a top 10 real-life talent at the quarterback position. He offers you a decent rushing floor. I just think they're going to be running the ball quite often now, and I think the passing volume is going to be severely limited. At 17, we have Matthew Stafford against Detroit, his old team. I think this is going to be an absolute shootout of a game. I think that Stafford is going to hit Puka and Cooper Kupp for a lot of yards and catches this week. I think that he's a decently high ceiling player because I think this is going to be a shootout. He's going to have a lot of motivation to beat Detroit, and so I do like Stafford this week, but there are better, higher ceiling options. This next tier of quarterbacks are quarterbacks that could be in the top 10 to 12 if they have a good week. At 16, we have Tua. At 15, we have Caleb Williams. At 14, we have Jaden Daniels. And at 13, we have Jared Goff. So Tua plays against Jacksonville. I expect that to be a very high scoring game, a shootout potential game. It'll really just be dependent on if the touchdowns go to Tua or the running backs in this game. That remains to be seen. He just doesn't provide you anything on the ground, so that does limit his ceiling and prevents him usually from being a top 5 quarterback. He did, for instance, lead the league in passing yards this past season, and he still wasn't a top 5 quarterback. So because of that lack of rushing upside, he's going to be outside my top 15. But he does have the potential, if he has, say, a 400-yard, 3-touchdown passing game, to be inside the top 10. At 15, we have Caleb Williams. This is a little bit conservative, in my opinion. It is his first game, and it isn't the best matchup against Tennessee. However, he's really good and in a fantastic situation. I just want to give it 1 week to see what Caleb Williams looks like against a starting defense the entire game. But once again, he has the absolute potential to be a top 10 quarterback. At 14, I have Jaden Daniels against Tampa Bay. Not an inviting matchup by any means. And just like with Caleb Williams, I want to see 1 week of him against a real NFL defense the entire game. He presents a ton of rushing upside. And if he does look as good as he has in this preseason, just like with Caleb Williams, he has the potential to regularly be much further up in these rankings. Once again, I just want to see it against a real NFL defense, and especially a matchup that's not that good. At 13, we have Jared Goff against the Rams. It's going to be a very high-scoring game, in my opinion. I like Jared Goff to have probably 300 yards and 2 or so passing touchdowns, so I think he does present you with a solid amount of upside. One thing about him is almost every game for him this season is in a dome, and his dome versus non-dome splits are crazy. So I think that Jared Goff, more weeks than not, is going to be a very solid, safe option for you with a relatively decent ceiling. So he does have top 8 potential if he has a good week. And like I said, with any of these quarterbacks, there is potential for them to be in the top 10 to 12. This next tier of quarterbacks are quarterbacks that I think are probably low-end QB1s. At 12, we have Brock Purdy. At 11, we have T-Law. At 10, we have Burrow. And at 9, we have Jordan Love. So with Brock Purdy, it's just that this matchup is atrocious. He is part of the Shanahan team, so he has wonderful playmakers all around him. McCaffrey, Debo, Ayuk. Prayers up to Ricky Pearsall. I think he'll be fine, though. He's an absolute dog. Look up his one-handed catch in college. That was crazy. And he has Kittle as well. So he has an assortment of playmakers. The offensive line isn't the best. The Jets are one of the most formidable defenses in the NFL, so I have him down here at 12 just because it's about as bad of a matchup as you could expect for him. At 11, I have T-Law against Miami. I expect that to be an absolute barn burner. I think he has a ton of upside. He has been a solid high-end 2, low-end QB1 throughout his career besides his rookie season. He's shown us stretches of fantastic quarterback play. The line has just not kept him upright. He really hasn't had the playmakers around him. Now he finally has that vertical threat in Brian Thomas Jr. He's looked really good in limited action this preseason. Gabe Davis is an upgrade from what he's had in, say, Zay Jones. Although Gabe Davis, nobody likes Gabe Davis. He's better than people give him credit for, but definitely not an elite wide receiver by any means. He has Christian Kirk still, a very solid vertical threat from the slot. He has Evan Ingram still, one of the better tight ends in the league. He has ETN behind him in the backfield. I think this is going to be a very solid offense, and I think T-Law is going to surprise people. In this game, I think he has a very solid amount of upside because, once again, I think it's going to be very high scoring. At 10, I have Burrow against New England. So they're probably going to get out to an early lead. He's going to be back to full health, hopefully. They have Jamar Chase. They have T. Higgins. They even signed Zach Moss in the backfield. I think he's going to get a decent amount of goal line work. They even have Mike Gesicki, actually. I think this is going to be an upgrade from what he's had in the past, just really due to Mike Gesicki. I think he's a lot better of a tight end than he's shown us the past 2 seasons in New England. New England is just a dumpster fire. So I think that he's going to get you a lot of points in the first half of the game. I think in the latter half of the game, though, he might get pulled. So I do think he doesn't present you with as much upside as he does with some weeks. At 9, we have Jordan Love against Philly. That is last season, that would have been a really solid matchup. This season, however, with them drafting multiple cornerbacks, I don't think this is as inviting of a matchup as you might think. However, he is in a wonderful offense with Coach LaFleur calling the plays, a Shanahan-style scheme. They even brought in Josh Jacobs at running back that'll provide some balance. It's just not a good matchup all around for any of them. There's a good chance he gets sacked a couple times with the ferocious pass rush that the Eagles have. And if this past half of the season is and the playoffs is anything that we can expect in the future, he has the ability to be a perennial low-end QB1 with high-end QB1 upside any given week. So once again, I think that he does have the ability to probably be a low-end QB1 this week. This tier of quarterbacks are quarterbacks that should be QB1s and have the potential to be a top 3 quarterback this week. Each of them has an inviting matchup. At 8, we have Dak Prescott. At 7, we have Kyler Murray. At 6, we have CJ Stroud. And 5, we have A-Rich. So Dak Prescott is up against Cleveland. They're going to be passing the ball a lot this game. CeeDee Lamb is basically unstoppable. And Dak Prescott, when he gets hot, is capable of 30-plus point games for us in fantasy. I do expect them to be able to pass the ball a little bit more than they're going to be able to run the ball. Cleveland's run defense is absolutely nasty. So I think he's going to be a very safe QB1. I think it is a little bit less likely that he ends up as a top 3 QB this week because it isn't quite as inviting as you would think. But I think they are going to have to pass a little bit more than they want to. So I think he's a solid QB1. At 7, I have Kyler Murray against Buffalo. This past season, he was QB6 in points per game. So he would have finished as a QB6 if he had played an entire season. It's an inviting matchup against Buffalo that lost both starting safeties and Tre'Davious White. I think he's going to have an easy time passing the ball, and he's a very solid threat on the ground as well. At QB6, we have CJ Stroud against Indianapolis. This is going to be, in my opinion, a high-scoring game. CJ Stroud has 3 great wide receivers to throw to now. He has Joe Mixon in the backfield, an above-average tight end, in my opinion, in Dalton Schultz. It's a very high-scoring game, more than likely, and so I think he has a ton of upside this week, even though his rushing upside is pretty limited. At QB5, I have A-Rich against Houston. He had over 17 fantasy points in about 33% of the snaps against Houston this past season. This guy has absolute max upside. In my opinion, he probably has the most potential upside of any quarterback. There are just more talented quarterbacks ahead of him in these rankings. But it's a very inviting matchup, and he had 17 points in about a third of the snaps this past season against Houston. The final tier of quarterbacks are absolute studs. They're recurring top 5 quarterbacks. We have Lamar Jackson at 4, Mahomes at 3, Hurts at 2, and Allen at 1. At 4, we have Lamar Jackson in what's likely to be a shootout type of game against Kansas City. I think that Baltimore could potentially be losing and need to pass the ball. So I like Lamar and the pass catchers a little bit more than I like Derrick Henry this week. You'll see in the running back rankings video. But Lamar is one of the best, if not potentially the best dual threat quarterback of all time. He's going to score a lot of points this game. There's not really much more that needs to be said. Mahomes at 3. He's a better quarterback than Lamar Jackson. They now have Xavier Worthy. They won't have Hollywood Brown for week 1, but they still have Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco out of the backfield. Mahomes is going to return to elite form this season, so it's a pretty decent matchup against Baltimore. Their passing defense, I think, is going to regress slightly with McDonald no longer their DC. So overall, I think he's going to be a top 3 quarterback this week. At 2, I have Jalen Hurts against Green Bay. It's a very inviting matchup. I think he's going to torch their secondary. Now, they did bring in Saquon Barkley, so I'm not sure there's going to be as many tush-push touchdowns, which may decrease his total rushing touchdowns. He's still a very high floor, high ceiling player, though. And with Jason Kelce retiring, really, I'm not sure if they're even going to do the tush-push this season. However, they're going to have an extremely efficient offense. They now have Kellen Moore there as an OC. I do like that for him. He still has A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. So he's a very high upside play. And at QB1, I have Josh Allen against Arizona. So Josh Allen, until he's no longer the QB1, usually he's going to remain my QB1. I think his ceiling is a lot more limited without Stephon Diggs there. Now, they did draft Keon Coleman. I do like him for the red zone, but in terms of an X receiver, he's neither quick nor fast, struggles to separate, and struggles against zone coverage. Basically, everything you don't want, the antithesis of a good X receiver, in other words. Then they have Dalton Kincaid, who's an above-average tight end. I think he's going to be heavily targeted. James Cook is an above-average passing down back. Not that special running the ball, though. They did draft Ray Davis, so I do think he's going to be used along the goal line to help reduce the hits that Josh Allen takes, just like with Barkley and Jalen Hurts. So I think his ceiling is a little bit more limited than it was, but he's still one of the highest ceiling players in the game. And he's still going to be number one in what is a fantastic matchup in week 1. In totality, Derek Carr and Russell Wilson are quarterbacks that I think are going to be QB 25 or worse. The next tier is could be top 25. That's Brissett, Nix, Minshew, Darnold, and Jones. Then we have quarterbacks that could be top 20 in Bryce Young, Will Levis, and Geno Smith. Then we have quarterbacks that potentially could be top 15 in Baker Mayfield, Watson, Cousins, Rodgers, Herbert, and Stafford. Then we have quarterbacks that potentially could be in the top 10 to 12 in Tua, Caleb, Jaden, and Goff. Then we have probable low-end QB1s in Brock Purdy, T-Law, Burrow, and Love. Then we have quarterbacks that potentially could be in the top 3 if they have a really good week because all of them have above-average matchups in Prescott, Murray, CJ Stroud, and A-Rich. And finally, in the last tier, we have the absolute studs. These are probably QB1s at worst in Lamar Jackson, Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen. All right, so those are my tiered quarterback rankings, 32 through 1. Should I have somebody a little bit higher, a little bit lower? Let me know in the comment section below. If you have any start-sit questions, feel free to let me know below and I'll help answer your questions. Also, I'm doing tight end, wide receiver, and running back rankings, so feel free to check those out. If you like what you've seen, I'm going to be doing these every single week, so feel free to like and subscribe especially. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist. Thank you and have a good day.